To surrender to bullies, to bow down to dictators is simply unthinkable. Were we to do that, it means we'd be forgetting what happened here in these hallowed beaches. Make no mistake, we will not bow down. We will not forget. Let me end with this. History tells us freedom is not free. If you want to know the price of freedom, come here to Normandy. Come to Normandy and look.
We have been here before. Appeasement, denialism, a fifth column at home that for whatever reason denigrates our freedoms, denigrates Americanism, and worships foreign fascists, whether they be Adolf Hitler in the 1930s or Vladimir Putin or Viktor Orban in the 2020s. We are not fated to live in freedom permanently. We cannot give up what these men paid their lives for. Americans cannot lay down their freedoms to a demagogue and a corrupted party of fascists who want power at all costs. Is it possible that the American people will decide to replace this man, the President of the United States of America, with this man, an orange-tinged fascist, a convicted felon, a man found liable for rape and then for defaming the woman he raped, a serial liar, a man who ripped off every small contractor who ever had the misfortune to work for him, a conspiracy theorist, and somebody utterly incoherent on even his best days. 152 days remain until the American people will make the decision. This is the warning. June 6th, 2024. 80 years have passed since the commencement of what is remembered by history as the Day of Days. These 4 beats on a kettle drum, 3 dots and a dash were Morse code. It stood for victory. It was the preface of every BBC broadcast. And 80 years ago, on June the 5th, the BBC broadcast a message for our French friends. John has a long mustache. And with that, the resistance went into action and struck. A few minutes past midnight, the first gliders carrying Major John Howard and his men of the British 6th Airborne landed to seize the bridges over the Orne River to make certain that the British troops landing on Sword Beach could make it inland, establishing a beachhead. The British landed near the bridge and secured it. They liberated the first home in France. On the west side, Americans of the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne began falling from the sky over Saint-Mère-Église, the first town to be liberated by the American Army. 120,000 soldiers of 11 nations stormed the beaches: Utah Beach, Sword, Juneau, Gold, and Omaha, the deadliest of them all. It is above that beach where the American cemetery lies. There are nearly 10,000 graves in it. All of them face west, back towards home, back towards America, back across the ocean from which these young men crossed but did not return home, to their wives, to their mothers, to their sisters and brothers and girlfriends. They lie there, an American army in formation at permanent rest, in silent judgment of their sacrifice for freedom and liberty. There is a thing about remembrance that should be noted. Had there been a war that was greater, that was deadlier, that America survived, that the world survived, then there would not have been a commemoration at Normandy today. We remember the Second World War and the sacrifices and the commencement of the Battle of Normandy and the liberation of Europe because it was history's climactic event so far as killing goes. It has not been repeated. It has not been succeeded for almost 100 years, minus a score. The question at hand in Ukraine, in Europe, around the world, when we look as free people at the growing menace of the access of Iran and North Korea and Russia and China, is the confrontation one nearly a lifetime ago to be refought in a new century? And if it is to be refought in a new century, is it survivable? The Polish president, Donald Tusk, has already warned young Poles people who fought heroically and valorously during the Second World War like no other captive people, people who never gave up, who never stopped fighting. President Tusk told his nation and its young people to be ready to fight for existence, for freedom. Back in 1940, when Britain was under siege, many Americans said that wasn't our fight, it wasn't our problem, who cares? In fact, there were scores of thousands of Americans who filled up Madison Square Garden to give the Hitler salute, fascists. There were many Americans in open support of the fascist cause. There were many more indifferent to the plight of freedom. The draft, which was necessary for the survival of the United States, in 1940 was sustained by the Congress by just one vote. We have been here before. Appeasement, denialism, a fifth column at home that for whatever reason denigrates our freedoms, denigrates Americanism, and worships foreign fascists, whether they be Adolf Hitler in the 1930s or Vladimir Putin or Viktor Orban in the 2020s. We are not fated to live in freedom permanently. That is what President Biden talked about today. And he said something that almost precisely echoed what President Reagan said 40 years ago. Now, when you put President Reagan and President Biden next to each other, some people will say these two men don't belong next to each other because they were in different political parties. And that is nonsense. Both of these men, 40 years apart, have delivered a seminal message, a meaningful warning. They have reminded us that there are causes greater than life itself. They reminded us that there are causes worth dying for. And the men we remember today on this day of freedom that we celebrate, that we thank with great gratitude, did that so that we may live in freedom. And we owe them a great debt. Listen to Ronald Reagan.
You were here to liberate, not to conquer. And so you and those others did not doubt your cause. And you were right not to doubt. You all knew that some things are worth dying for. One's country is worth dying for, and democracy is worth dying for because it's the most deeply honorable form of government ever devised by man. All of you loved liberty. All of you were willing to fight tyranny. And you knew the people of your countries were behind you.
Listen to Joe Biden.
Every one of them knew the probability of dying was real, but they did it anyway. They knew beyond any doubt there are things that are worth fighting and dying for. Freedom is worth it. Democracy is worth it. America is worth it. The world is worth it. Then, now, and always.
This is not a Democratic message. It is not a Republican message. It is a message of the leader of a free people. 40 years ago, freedom was threatened. President Reagan talked about it.
We've learned that isolationism never was and never will be an acceptable response to tyrannical governments with an expansionist intent. But we try always to be prepared for peace, prepared to deter aggression, prepared to negotiate the reduction of arms, and yes, prepared to reach out again in the spirit of reconciliation. In truth, there is no reconciliation we would welcome more than a reconciliation with the Soviet Union, so together we can lessen the risks of war now and forever.
And today, his successor talked about the threats to our world today. He named the tyrant, Vladimir Putin, called him out directly, forcefully, clearly. He drew the line.
Ukraine has been invaded by a tyrant bent on domination. Ukrainians are fighting with extraordinary courage, suffering great losses, but never backing down.
President Biden made clear and reminded everyone what keeps us safe, what keeps us free is overwhelming strength. We must remember what President Biden tried to help the country remember today, which at its core is this. Today was not a speech about the past. It was a speech about gratitude for our freedom. and an urgent warning about the danger. We should heed it, because let us do whatever we can to make sure there is no need ever for the creation of an American cemetery in Europe ever again. Colin Powell beautifully pointed this out once. He said, America is not a conquering nation. We came to Europe as an army of liberation. And when that war was over, the only land we asked for was enough to bury our dead. And make no mistake, it doesn't matter if you were alive when the events occurred. It doesn't matter that they occurred before your existence. This American sacrifice and achievement belongs to all Americans for all time through the ages. But that achievement incurs an obligation. And that obligation, when it comes to the memory of this day, requires deep respect and gratitude. We cannot give up what these men paid their lives for. Americans cannot lay down their freedoms to a demagogue and a corrupted party of fascists who want power at all costs, including at the expense of the ideals of the nation. That's what today is about. And we should remember the lessons of history, because when they are ignored, there is a fearsome price that is paid. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning, and I invite you to subscribe on our Substack, on our YouTube channel. Follow us. Welcome to the community.